Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for Salt Lake City Planning Commission on October 9th, 2024. It's 5:30 p.m. You can see we have 5 members of the Planning Commission here, and the director of the planning director, Nick Norris, is here, and the planning manager, Kelsey Lindquist, are both here. So we'll start with the report of the chair and the vice chair. My name's Amy Burrows. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission for this year, and I have a couple things I wanted to recognize. Yesterday in the Salt Lake County Council passed a resolution with a commitment to preserve Abravanel Hall in its current form and at its current site. So that may be something that's interesting to this group, as we've talked about Abravanel Hall a lot lately. Recognizing it's not a city asset, but it still is part of the fabric of our city. Also, the Utah Hockey Club had its inaugural game last night, which they won 5-2. So that was an exciting event that was downtown in Salt Lake City. Does the vice chairperson have anything to report?
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Great. Now it's time for the report of the planning director.
I don't have anything to report tonight either. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now it's time for an open forum, which is a time where the commissioners may discuss planning, zoning, and general land use items that are not listed on the agenda. This is limited to 10 minutes and does not include a public discussion. Do any commissioners have anything to discuss? No. Okay. Thank you. We'll move to the consent agenda. So there are 2 items on our consent agenda tonight. The first is a request for conditional use for the Other Side Academy Adult Daycare at approximately 630 East, 100 South. That case number is PLN PCM 2024-00792. And the second item is a conditional use request for KRCL Community Radio at approximately 509 West, 300 North. And that case number is PLN PCM 2024-00631. I'm going to open the public hearing for those 2 items. If anyone wants to speak on either of those items that I just referenced, you can approach the podium right now and make your comment. Or if there are any new comments that we received since the reports were published. No. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing for those 2 items. It's now time for a discussion among the commission or a motion.
I'll make a motion. So I move that we accept the consent agendas items 1 and 2.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Scott. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, we're going to vote on it. So we'll have Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. So that the consent agenda passes unanimously. So thank you. Okay, the first item on our regular agenda is a text amendment to permit outdoor theaters in the CG General Commercial District. This is case number PLN PCM 2024-00595. The planner is Noah Elmore. You want to present the project to us?
Thank you, commissioners. So let me just set all this up.
Really quick, I have some vested interest in this text amendment, so I'm going to recuse myself from this agenda item. There's a quorum with 4, so I'm going to step out really quick.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Krasik will leave the room while we discuss and vote on this item.
All right. So, at their formal meeting on May 7th, 2024, Salt Lake City Council initiated a petition to research and draft an ordinance to permit live performance theaters, either indoor or outdoor, within the CG General Commercial District and any other district that may be appropriate based on intensity, scale, and location. Currently, only indoor live performance theaters are permitted based on a code provision stipulating all business activity shall be conducted wholly within an enclosed building unless specifically specified otherwise. Staff will be recommending a positive recommendation to City Council concerning this amendment. So, the details. To start, the proposal includes revising the definition of live performance theaters to allow for either indoor or outdoor use. The revised definition you can see there has been streamlined as well to remove excess or superfluous language, just to make it a little easier and more readily comprehensible. From there, the land use tables were updated to add the outdoor live performance theater use and distinguish it from the existing indoor live performance theater use. Specifically, the land use tables were revised for the CG, GMU, OS, PL2, and all downtown districts. Those districts either already have live performance theaters as a permitted use or the similar formal amphitheater use. For outdoor live performance theaters in the CG, GMU, and downtown districts, a footnote will be attached prohibiting the use within 1,000 feet of any residential district. That prohibition is based on district as opposed to use. Currently, live performance theaters, which will now become indoor live performance theaters specifically, have a footnote attached prohibiting the use within 1,000 feet of a single or two-family zoning district. This footnote will remain in place and will be clarified to prohibit the use specifically on lots within 1,000 feet. So here's a breakdown of the subject districts which currently permit live performance theaters and which currently permit formal amphitheaters. The outdoor live performance theater use will be replacing the instances of formal amphitheaters in those use districts. These districts were all chosen based on the expected intensity of existing uses and the anticipated intensity of the outdoor theaters. So for example, the purpose statement of the CG district notes, this district provides economic development opportunities through a mix of land uses, including, among other things, entertainment uses. For those districts with the formal amphitheater use, that use is similar to an outdoor theater already, so the anticipated use is therefore expected to be similar. With that in mind, as the formal amphitheater use has no footnote currently attached to it in the way that the indoor live performance theaters do, no footnote is proposed for the OS and PL2 districts. You may notice the GMU, I didn't mention that. That's because live performance theaters are already permitted in GMU with that footnote, so we will be attaching that footnote for outdoor live performance theaters in the GMU. And then just to confirm, indoor live performance theaters aren't included in this proposal. This is exclusively related to outdoor. So then I just have some maps here. I know this is kind of big picture and maybe a little hard to see the finer details, but this just shows citywide in green there. This is the open space. And then there are the other districts. The hatched area is the buffer. So then just to zoom in on the more populated area, you can see our downtown districts sort of on the east there with the GMU in the northwest and the CG in red. You'll notice the hatched area does not apply to the green OS districts. That's because the buffer does not apply there. And you may notice that hatched light blue color along the east of downtown, that's the PL2 district. So it also does not have the buffer. And then here's just to highlight those parcels which will permit the outdoor live performance theater. You can see those sort of bolded here. And then, as you may be aware of the ongoing zoning consolidation, here's what that map will look like post-consolidation. So for the MU6, MU8, and MU11, those districts are corresponding to our general commercial district and other districts which permit indoor live performance theaters currently. And so you can see those in the lighter green, sort of in the northwest. That's MU6. The lighter blue is MU8. And this purple running north-south, where the CG is presently, is MU11. The hatched areas in red represent areas where that buffer will no longer apply following the consolidation. So it sort of clears out a little by the University of Utah and sort of east central downtown. And just to note, this map is subject to change as the process is ongoing. Public process included the petition, sending out the 45-day required noticing to the recognized community organizations, posting online open house, and posting the notice of the public hearing. We did receive some public comments concerning noise, and that is related to that expanded buffer to apply to all residential districts. In contrast to the existing buffer being a little more limited, we expanded it. Based on the information discussed, staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. Any questions?
Is there an applicant in this process, or was it initiated by the Salt Lake City Council?
Councilman Pui.
Okay. Do you have any clarifying questions? This is not time to discuss the merits of this request, but just to clarify anything. No. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing. If anyone wants to speak on this request or this item, you can approach the podium. No. Or any new comments? Thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing then. And now we'll be in executive session so that the members of the Planning Commission can discuss this request. Discuss or make a motion.
No, I just want to clarify. I mean, I know the answer, but let's put it on the record that this ordinance doesn't supersede the noise ordinance by the Salt Lake County. That's set. They still have to follow those rules, yes?
Correct.
I have a question because the staff report references a conversation that we had previously that where we were concerned that some activities were not allowed within single or two family residences, but were allowed in larger residence uses. And I wonder if there was some comment to that in the report, but why is it, how do we see that concerning equity where these won't be allowed within like a duplex or a single family residence, but would be allowed by a triplex or a fourplex?
So I think that goes to what you're looking at in the district. So for instance, we expanded the buffer to target all residential districts. Those are those districts that are intended for those residential focused uses. When we're looking at downtown CG, those are where we expect high intensity uses such as this. In fact, we're seeing similar uses are already present, like the already existing indoor live performance theaters. So these districts are designed for these high intensity uses. That's what you would expect to see in these districts.
Why are we? I feel like if a use is allowed within 1,000 feet of a fourplex, then maybe it should be allowed within 1,000 feet of a single family home or a duplex. And this would be the time to change that language at this time. I recognize that you're allowing, not allowing an outdoor theater within 1,000 feet of any kind of residential district. Is that right?
Correct.
But maintaining you can't have an indoor live theater within 1,000 feet of a single family home or a duplex.
So as I mentioned, indoor live performance theaters are out of the scope of this proposal. So that's not something we were looking at. This was specifically about outdoor live performance theaters.
It is you are changing, though, the language that references the distance from like on, let's see, on attachment A, it talks about table of permitted and conditional uses for residential districts. You are changing the qualifying provision for that, for indoor live performance theaters.
So I wouldn't say we're changing it, but rather we're clarifying it to apply to lots as opposed to uses. So you may recall that discussion with the concrete manufacturing batch plant.
Right.
So this clarifies it applies to the lot specifically as opposed to the use. It's much more readily identifiable based on the lot as
Right.
opposed to if we base it on the use, then we have to look at every single parcel within 1,000 feet of the proposal, and that's not feasible.
Right. That was, I remember that conversation, and part of that conversation was that we felt like we should reconsider the designation between single and two-family zoning districts.
And that's what the proposal does. It goes from just the existing single or two family to all residential districts. So, for example, when you're looking at that residential districts table, it's all of those districts.
But note 13 is still there on that specific table. That qualifying provision number 13 is still there.
Yes, because it's for the indoor live performance theater, which you'll see are a conditional use for RB, RMU 35. There are still some other districts which have indoor live performance theater as a conditional use. So that footnote will remain for the indoor use.
Right. That's
Which is out of the scope
my
of
point is
work.
that if we're, but it's kind of in the scope of work because we're addressing that that qualifying provision. But maybe I'm the only one who has that concern. But it does. I wish that we would fix all of those at the same time since we're considering it. But made that clear. So
If there's no discussion, I'm ready to make a motion. Okay. Based on the information presented in the discussion for PLN PCM 2024-00595, the text amendment to permit outdoor live performance theaters, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this text amendment to the City Council.
I'll second.
okay, that's a motion by Commissioner Berry and a second by Commissioner Gale. Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
And I also will vote yes, so that's unanimous. We'll forward a positive recommendation to adopt that text amendment.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
your time.
Thank you. I think we're gathering Commissioner Krasik back. Thank you.
Sure. No, that's great.
Commissioner Krasik has returned. Our next item on the regular agenda is the Granary District Area Plan. And the planner is Laura McClellan.
Sorry, better. It's been a minute. Yeah, I'm Laura McClellan with the Transportation Division, and I was the PM on the Granary District Plan. And this plan, it's an area-wide multimodal circulation plan, again, led by the Transportation Division. And this was funded by a grant from the Wasatch Front Regional Council through their Transportation Land Use TLC program. And the goal of the plan was to recommend transportation solutions to increase connectivity, safety, and comfort for all road users. The plan recommended attainable improvements, sort of like short-term and mid-term projects that could be seek funding for and implemented in a 2 to 10 year time frame. And the goal of this plan was just to identify high-level concepts that the Transportation Division could reference when seeking funding for different projects in the area. This also relates to several adopted plans within the city. The recently adopted citywide transportation plan, it will work towards several of the key moves from that plan. For example, there was create safer streets, improve pedestrian safety and connectivity, expand low-stress bicycling networks and micromobility options, promote connectivity at the block level to create walkable districts, and use street typologies to guide complete streets development. The downtown plan back in 2016 references the wide streets with relatively few cars provide opportunities for a new way of thinking about our streets as public spaces that provide space for movement and public gathering. And that was something that we thought about as we were developing this plan, and something that some property owners and developers are also open to repurposing the right-of-way to serve more of a public function. Plan Salt Lake from 2015 also had some of those key moves in regards to neighborhoods, growth, transportation, air quality, beautiful city, equity, and economy. And then the Salt Lake City Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan also seeks to integrate walking and bicycling into community planning and, again, develop a safe, comfortable, and attractive walking and bicycling network. Just to give a brief overview of the public engagement that was conducted during this plan's development. The Granary District Alliance was really integral to connecting with the local business community, residents in the area, developers as well. They were really fantastic to work with, and they were super helpful in helping us connect with all of those different parties. The consultant team and the city project manager participated in the Huda Fest event in October 2023, where we interacted with, I think, over 200 people, had a printed map where folks could leave points of conflict or things that they wanted the project team to take into consideration when we were thinking about the district. So received over 150 comments during that event. And then on the virtual side, we had a survey with an interactive map as well, and received 72 full responses to the survey and another 206 comments left on the interactive map. And then we also had a community event for Granary District businesses and developers that was held at Industry SLC in December, and 36 different businesses and developers attended that event. And it was to provide input on the Granary District Area Plan and also the TechLink track study that there will be a new rail reactivated through the area, and so got feedback from 36 different business owners and developers during that event. So for the plan itself, we used the Salt Lake City Street Typologies Design Guide as sort of the foundation to look at the area. We looked at the assigned street typologies for each street within the study area and said, okay, what does it look like to implement the typologies as is? And then going from there, identifying the barriers that we might run into if we were going to do that, and what would need to be adjusted for each of the typologies. A few of the barriers that we identified were parking or flex zones, and this was, maybe identified as a barrier if available parking was located in areas where like a flex zone might be a better fit. In other words, maybe a potential parking reduction in the future. Non-motorized facilities or behind the curb were identified if it might be difficult to implement the recommended bike or pedestrian facilities or placemaking areas if they were restricted by the existing right-of-way. What might have to be taken away, or some compromises made, some trade-offs, depending on the existing right-of-way. And then along the same lines, right-of-way and curb-to-curb were evaluated as a barrier if a lane reduction might be required to implement the recommended street typology, which would just cause a need for a more substantial reconstruction of the corridor of the right-of-way. But that was, again, planning level purposes only. There was no engineering design done at this stage. And then finally, utilities and tree canopy. Did a lot of work in tandem with the Public Utilities Department, and also considering the major transmission lines that are present in some of the study area, old railroad infrastructure that might pose challenges to implementing the assigned street typology. So again, this was just sort of showing what those barriers might be, not saying that any of them are insurmountable, but just calling those out as a starting point. Then what we did moving into recommendations was identify intersection improvements, so spot gaps where are there uncomfortable crossings for bikes, pedestrians, people walking or rolling through the area. Network gaps, which were identifying opportunities for maybe new mid-block connections. There's so much new development going in the area and potential opportunities to integrate some of those mid-block connections. Some of the developers are already doing that with their projects, making sure that they have pedestrian connections going through the middle of their sometimes block-sized projects. And then just corridor recommendations. And we called out a few specific ones. We called them catalytic corridors, focusing on what doesn't overlap with other projects that will be coming in. On this map, you can see like Fifth West was not identified as one of these because that will be considered during the Green Loop planning process, and so we didn't want to duplicate efforts. But looking at 6th West as an opportunity, 8th South, and 4th West as well. And what we did after identifying those specific intersections and corridors was put everything into a priority projects matrix that had a lot of different factors that went into the prioritization, including cost, utility impacts, user comfort, maintenance impacts, enhancements to the non-motorized network, and a few other, is this improvement complex to construct, trying to identify things that could be accomplished in the near term versus the midterm. And so, you can see on the matrix to the right here, there are different spot projects, network projects, and corridor projects that were identified as near term or midterm. And so not every potential improvement was recommended as part of this suite of projects, just because they may be longer term or more major projects that would be more complex to implement in sort of the intended time frame for this plan. Sorry, wrong computer. And so moving forward, thinking about taking action, again, we had just high-level concept design examples for each of the priority corridors, 4th West, 6th West, and 8th South. And moving forward, the Transportation Division would be able to use those high-level concepts to identify potential funding sources and see how these suggestions, these recommendations might align with other upcoming transportation projects and how we could fit these recommendations to our funding applications moving forward, and then also trying to stay aligned with all of the development that is happening in the area. And the developer community is also very interested in seeing improvements within the right of way as well as on those private parcels that they're developing as well. And as I mentioned, there are several other pretty large projects that are ongoing in development that intersect with the study area as well. You have the Green Loop, TechLink, which is moving forward into selecting a preferred alternative from UTA, and then that will move forward into more design and environmental, so that's moving forward. And then finally, the fleet block is also going to be an important factor when trying to figure out timing and how to implement and how to leverage funding in the implementation of this plan. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have a clarifying question right now? No. Okay, thank you. I'm going to open a public comment period. If you want to speak on this project, you can approach the microphone. don't see anyone. So I'll close the public comment period. And it's open for discussion among the planning commissioners. When I looked at this plan in this neighborhood, there are not any schools inside this the borders of this neighborhood, but there probably are, unless every kid who lives there is bused to a school. Did you consider like safe walking routes among the schools and stuff like that?
That's a good question. That was not something that I didn't call out specific community centers or things like schools. I think the intent was that eventually this plan, if implemented, you would have safe walking infrastructure for the entire district. And to be clear, there are some major barriers leaving the district. You have major UDOT streets, 5th and 6th South, and then West Temple as well. And that's actually one that I should have mentioned on this ongoing projects list, is that the Grand Boulevards study will be kicking off fairly soon. And so taking more of a look at those 5th and 6th South corridors, and hopefully creating some, again, high-level concept designs for improving walking and biking conditions north-south. But the goal of this plan would certainly be to have safe walking routes within the district. There's lots of missing sidewalks, and so those would ideally be constructed. And again, having, where possible, like safe and separated bicycle infrastructure as well. So that was how we were looking at it, rather, just the whole picture, and really trying to improve conditions all the way around and not calling out specific destinations.
Thank you.
I really love this plan. I think that it's potentially bringing a lot of really great stuff to this neighborhood that really, really needs it. One of the questions that I kind of have is your kind of short-term and mid-term, they seem really short. That seems like very soon. So how do you think there is pursuing funding moving forward is something that the report kind of like states? Is that is it realistic? Are those like short-term goals realistic within the framework that you've seen?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and probably 2 years is a little too ambitious on that. I do think the Transportation Division has been exploring more quick build opportunities, and just doing some of those short-term temporary installations to immediately provide better safe conditions for folks walking and biking. And then I think that some of the more, we've done a lot of corridor reconstructions over the city lately, and I think that we do have some opportunities, especially on 8th South, like some restriping opportunities maybe before reconstruction. So I like to think of it as the potential for phased implementations, and so maybe, again, like a little too ambitious for the full implementation within that time frame, but I think that we could see pieces, and especially leveraging that developer connection, and where at least several of the developers have indicated an interest in partnering, having a public-private partnership on some of those improvements. I think that could really help catalyze some of those quicker improvements and might make them more possible in this particular neighborhood than maybe they would be otherwise.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that element is like, I love to see all of it, and I just don't want to like create false expectations that there's this super short time frame, but sounds like there's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it's going to be achievable. So that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any more discussion?
I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we forward a positive recommendation to the City Council to adopt the Granary District Area Plan.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Gale and a second by Commissioner Krasik. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
and I will also vote yes. That's 5 unanimous votes for this, so we'll forward a positive recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is a briefing, which does not include a public comment period. The Fair Park zoning amendments at approximately 1500 West North Temple. This is case number PLN PCM 2024-00982. And I'll ask the planner and presenters to introduce themselves.
Hi, Amanda Roman, urban designer in the planning division. Thank you for having us. Today I'll do a briefing on a proposed text amendment, which is called the Jordan River Fair Park Zoning District. A little project background. The aerial on the screen is the subject property, which consists of about 38 parcels and covers 93 acres. Snell and Wilmer, representing Larry H. Miller, is proposing to create a new zoning district in the Fair Park neighborhood to facilitate its redevelopment. The Jordan River Fair Park District is part of a newly established Utah Fair Park Area Investment and Restoration District, which was created this year by House Bill 562. The UFair District aims to develop a walkable mixed-use neighborhood centered around the Jordan River and the Utah Fair Park. The vision includes revitalizing the river, rezoning for redevelopment, which is the proposal in front of you, and potentially attracting a Major League Baseball team to this location. The plans also feature retail, entertainment, housing, and employment opportunities. The bill requires that Salt Lake City and the applicant enter into an agreement by December 31st of this year, or development within this district would not be subject to any of our zoning regulations. So the purpose of this briefing is to discuss the proposal, gain feedback from you, and then we will return at the next Planning Commission hearing to make a recommendation and move this forward to the City Council. So I just want to start by saying here are 2 renderings from the Power District website that we pulled. The city is supportive of redeveloping the site into a mixed-use neighborhood aimed at attracting this MLB team. While city staff is fully aligned with the vision, which also meets the goals of the North Temple Boulevard plan, we do seek assurances that this vision is clearly represented within a regulatory framework. This could be incorporated into the zoning ordinance, which we'll discuss today, or the development agreement, which you'll be reviewing in more detail at the next meeting. So the staff feedback in this presentation are just suggestions on how to modify the proposed Jordan River Fair Park District zoning ordinance to make sure the regulations are clear and can be referenced as the site redevelops. Currently, the term sheet, you do have the draft in your staff report, but the term sheet and our review comments are with the mayor's office, and they'll be sent to the applicant and work through hopefully by the next meeting, if not then prior to moving forward to the city council. And the term sheet may include additional details on how to establish development regulations that support the overall vision of the Power District. The applicant is here today and can provide more information on how the zoning and the term sheet will further these goals. So just quickly go over the JRF district regulations. So the purpose of the district is to revitalize the Jordan River, implement the House bill which established the Utah Fair Park Area Investment and Restoration District, provide for a mix of uses, and then generate economic development, increase employment opportunities. The applicability of the plan, or of the zoning ordinance, states that the properties within the JRF district are not subject to any of the city's adopted plans. This would include the North Temple Boulevard plan, although the redevelopment is supported within that plan.
State-owned land is not subject to any city-imposed regulations, and they are proposing to be exempt from the riparian corridor overlay and the airport flight path protection overlay. The riparian corridor or overlay essentially just establishes development regulations for properties with 100 feet of the riparian corridor, and the overlay is intended to achieve a reasonable balance between the natural environment and redevelopment. And then the airport flight path overlay establishes regulations for properties near the airport. So the proposed zoning, I'll go through each section of their proposed zoning ordinance. The first section speaks to setbacks and open space. The proposal does not include any building setbacks, including no setback from the Jordan River. The open space regulations, they are proposing that no open space would be required on individual parcels or lots, but the language does say that they will use open space areas and pathways to facilitate pedestrian use, although the code itself does not have specifics. Staff feedback. So both planning and public lands are requesting that either the zoning ordinance or the term sheet provide a minimum percentage of open space, guaranteed open space within the development. Proposed building height. The proposal is to allow buildings up to 400 feet with design review required for buildings over 200 feet, which is a pretty basic standard throughout our downtown districts. The proposal includes requiring a 5-foot building step back, and a building must include one of the following: a mid-block walkway. They did not provide a minimum width for what that would need to be. Affordable housing incentives, and privately owned but publicly accessible open space within the boundaries of this district, and that open space would need to include a shade canopy of 60% of that open space area. And then there is no minimum square footage provided within that text. Additionally, development over 200 feet will need to submit plans to the FAA and take into account all recommendations to essentially just avoid interference with the airport and aircrafts. Staff feedback on the building height. So the proposed building height will ultimately be regulated by the FFA or FAA. Planning staff, as well as the applicant, we are working with the airport and a consultant. We haven't started working on this, but we're doing a study to review the impacts of future development within this area. So hopefully we can have a little bit more details on that for the next meeting with you, but the study will be done by Thanksgiving and will be forwarded to the city council. Feedback on the building height regulations. We are suggesting that the mid-block walkways associated with additional building height have a minimum width of 15 feet, which matches other zoning districts. And then we are also requesting that the open space associated with the additional building height has a minimum square footage requirement. Proposed land uses. Some of the proposed land uses in the ordinance don't align necessarily with the purpose of the zoning district. I have those listed below. We did do some consolidation of definitions, remove some land uses during this mixed-use consolidation project. And so if this ordinance is passed, we will ultimately end up modifying and making sure that the land uses match what are in the other land use tables. But the ones on the screen, staff has reviewed and does not believe they align with the overall purpose of the district. Proposed design standards. So the applicant is proposing design standards for both development along the periphery of the site as well as interior. The proposal states that the design standards would only apply to development along Redwood Road and North Temple, and then buildings within the interior of the district where there will be private roads. Those have not been established yet, but that's anticipated. A lot of private road development would not be subject to design standards. The applicant is proposing to screen mechanical equipment and provide street trees on the interior of the site. Staff feedback regarding the design standards. So staff is requesting that the applicant review the plans and apply the design standards to development on all public streets and along the Jordan River, not just Redwood Road and North Temple. And then we also recommend adding additional standards, which are already found in our design standards section of code. And we are recommending adding standards for lighting, entry features, parking garage standards, and maximum length of building facades. The proposed signage regulations, the proposal allows signage that's larger than in other zoning district and sign overlay districts. We are less concerned about signage within the interior of the development, but signage along public streets should match zoning districts that have similar development intensities. A reference point could be the newly created downtown entertainment district that was just recently passed as a reference point for what appropriate signage could look like. And then we have, the city has really three main priorities right now. We are seeking to include a minimum amount of open space to be provided with either within the zoning ordinance itself or the term sheet. The overall exemption from the riparian corridor overlay is not supported by public utilities. We will be sending the applicant comments on the term sheet on mitigation measures or suggestions on how to come to a consensus on the overlay. And then design standards should apply to all public roads and the Jordan River frontage, not just Redwood Road and North Temple. So the next steps, we're moving quick based on the state timeline. So the 45-day public engagement period ends 2 days before we'll be back here for a public hearing on this zoning ordinance that's before you today. At that time, you will have the development agreement, you'll have the term sheet to review and make a recommendation on as well. We need to have this transmitted to the City Council no later than October 30th. And then in November, we will hold briefings with the council, public hearings, and the adoption of the zoning ordinance and development agreement will be on either December 3rd or the 10th. So as I stated before, an agreement has to be reached before December 31st, or this area would not be subject to any of our zoning regulations. I'm available for questions, and then the applicant is here as well. Thank you.
So just kind of, I am curious about that last portion of if a development agreement is not kind of figured out, then by the 31st of December, then nothing applies from the city. But is that just a space for which one could procrastinate through? The developer could procrastinate through and just not do what we're asking until that, like, it.
Technically, yes, but we're working with them and we're negotiating and reviewing, other sections of our ordinance and providing suggestions on how to.
So some of this
rework
is
some
happening
sections.
in just good faith, like. Okay, sorry, just had to.
Yes.
I know yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very,
Thank you. It's
yeah,
hard.
It's a very short timeline. It's a quick turnaround, and so it's really on us and within the city to move forward as quickly as we can with our review comments and review periods.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is a briefing, but can we also get a briefing from the applicant if they're here? Like,
Yeah.
hear from
They're
them
here and they have a presentation, and I can pull that up for you. It is quite similar to mine, but he will have more information on the overall vision of the district and development agreement here. Let me switch you.
That's great. Thank you. My name is Wade Budge. I'm here representing the landowner, which is LHM Dev E, which is the Larry H. Miller Company. We're looking forward to and first of all, want to thank each of you for making time for us for this briefing. Today, our thoughts were to give you an overview, and we want to compliment staff because they've done a very good job of providing the overall construct and some of the concepts we've been working with as we've begun these negotiations. Our intent is to gather input from all of you and continue to work with the staff to have a very fulsome presentation for you on the 23rd. But we wanted to first begin by just orienting you to what is our thinking and our set of hopes, so you can understand where we're going. And then to just address what was stated in your question, Commissioner Krasik, our thought is this, that we wanted to show our good faith by making an application affirmatively. Sometimes the city will just go ahead and initiate its own rezone. In this instance, we've gone ahead and made our own application, and we've been engaged, and we want to really thank the staff. They've devoted a lot of resources and have been giving us a lot of ideas. And from the timeline, as we just heard, October is going to be a very busy month for us. We're going to be involved in a lot of discussions, and we'll be working to bring a very fulsome application to you all, our fulsome presentation rather, to you all on the 23rd. So what I thought I'd start with is just this context map, and what's important and what drives a lot of what you see here. Oh, not a touchscreen. So this one's the touchscreen?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Just this way?
No, it's not touchscreen, but.
Just that one. So what you'll see here is that the river is driving a big component of what is going on with respect to this site. We've been working with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, which has ownership and management responsibility over the Jordan River. And we're trying to balance what are their goals and initiatives along with the state fairground, which has its own entity, which we call the authority, because otherwise we get kind of tangled in an acronym soup here. We've got a district, we've got an authority, we've got the city and its departments, and then of course we have this other state entity, which is Sovereign State Lands. But as we're looking at this, I wanted to give you just a bit of historical context. I like what you see in this image. It's intended to be the same area, but in 1950, a couple of things going on. Fairgrounds were there in 1958. Interestingly, the KOA, which is what we call it now, the KOA is there in some form, slightly smaller. But you'll notice that there are some ball fields there. I like that historic tie. Those are the white ball fields. And while our goal is to actually locate the Major League facility on the other side of the river, I still like that it's within very close distance of what it was a historic use. And then, of course, the Jordan River is very prominent in this image. So these are some of the things that are motivating our efforts here today. As was indicated in the staff report, and I may go through some of my slides rather quickly because the staff did such a great job in orienting us to the overall construct. These are the areas that are under the application. These represent lands we own or have under contract, and then we do have a city parcel called out, which is the city owns that little sliver on the east side of the river. And then, but this is a more important one, and I don't think this was in the earlier presentation. What this represents in purple, and I hope that's coming through okay on your screen, this represents the boundaries of the district as identified in the statute that was passed. And so what these areas are, and let me just spend a moment on this. What we have here is the state buildings north of Redwood Road. We have the Natural Resources Building, which is also north of Redwood Road. North of North Temple, as we're next to I-215, that's a state building. And then as we get to the corner of Redwood Road and North Temple, you'll see the Natural Resources Building. And then as you go further north from there, there's further state lands that are owned. And then as you come around the bend, coming down the river, then you end up in the fairgrounds. And so a majority of these lands that you'll see here in the district boundaries are state lands. And so in that instance, the state's going to proceed and pursue its initiatives the way it desires. But in the process of negotiating this district, we worked with the city, and the input that we received and we passed along to the state is, with respect to this sizable portion of land that's at issue and we're discussing today, when it comes to that set of lands, let's work with Salt Lake City to make sure they retain zoning authority over those lands. And so the intent of this exercise is to come up with an ordinance that will work for these private lands, and then also make sure that we have a development agreement both by the deadline. And so, as was indicated by staff, those are two work streams that are currently going on. But I thought it was helpful to just orient all of us to this overall area. And what I don't have today are, for instance, a series of renderings on our project plan or those types of details. And that really is because those have changed and morphed a lot as we've gone through some discussions with various stakeholders. We've involved a nationally renowned planning firm known as Sataki to assist us with that planning effort of the private lands. And then we've engaged consultants who are advising us on fairground operations. Who knew that there was a separate subset of consultants on that topic, but there is. And one of the intents is to make sure that the development that occurs on this large Rocky Mountain Power parcel, which we have under contract, will meld in well with the kind of experiences that the fairground not only offers today, but is looking to offer in the future, to create a synergistic area for development and for community use. All right, so this is a slightly better picture. This shows how the if the zoning district as proposed were to be passed, it would apply. And the reason I identify this is the red area, which is, again, the application area, is overlaid over the existing zoning districts. And what you'll see is that there's a hodgepodge of existing zoning districts. And I know there's a consolidation effort that is going on separately and will probably be completed this year. But the intent that we brought forward with our application is to create one single zone for these private lands so that we, as what the statute calls as the qualified owner, meaning the owner of these 93 acres, we are able to not only negotiate and process zoning applications with you all and then development applications with you, but we can also respond to the district, which is a board that has now been set up. They just hired an executive director and they're hiring a staff. And the reason we need the ability to manage not only what you all require in terms of regulations, but also to deal with their requirements is because they hold a great deal in terms of the financial purse strings, so to speak. They are pulling in tax increment and pulling in dollars from other state sources to devote to the improvement of this area. And so we want, one of the things that you may see as we're diving into this ordinance is there seems to be a lot of flexibility. Well, one of the reasons is because we need the ability to respond to requests from this board that is will be coming, that's acting with their district hats on. So that's just a comment I wanted to get into the discussion as we're thinking over these provisions. And as was indicated by staff, the purposes of the act were to establish the board, to set up finance mechanisms and revitalize these areas and provide for coordination with state assets in the area. What we've done is we've taken that set of purposes and we've then put them into a format that is similar, not identical, and certainly has some aspects that are unique, but that you'll find in other zoning districts in the city. And so one of the things we did is we obviously had a purpose statement, applicability section, dealt with yard standards and heights, have a very extensive use table, which some of the comments I just saw for the first time and we'll take back to the client and we'll talk about before our meeting on the 23rd. And then we have a component in here about design standards and how that would work, and then sign regulations. So I'm going to touch on a few of these topics, but I invite any of you to interrupt me at any time to ask for further clarification. I don't mean to just have a monologue up here, so feel free to interrupt. The purpose statement, I think, has been covered, and it's in the materials if you ever want to look more at that. And also, I believe the statute is in the packet, so that could be looked at as well. As staff indicated, there are no general plans that apply, just simply because we didn't want to have a conflict. And what I found is really interesting here, and this was actually a surprise to me, is that when you're looking these, if we go back a couple of slides, I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about. So you'll see how it says West-South Temple. That road is actually not a public road, it's a private road all the way through. And so one of the things that's interesting here is the known public roads that are very prominent and that affect this area are North Temple and Redwood Road. Ironically, South Temple is not. And then we are working right now on a road matrix with our master plan advisors. And the intent would be to either dedicate those to the public or arrange for other public use. But those are some of the interesting items and motivated the desire that we not have general plans apply, because we didn't want to have something that might have been in conflict with what the board may tell us needs to happen with respect to these lands. And then the staff touched on the overlay districts, and that's intended to cover not only the riparian area was mentioned, but also to cover the FAA requirements. And we want to, first of all, compliment the staff and the city, because the city has been very, very proactive on this item relative to interfacing with the airport and the FAA. We want to compliment them because they've gone out and hired a consultant, and we've been working with them to provide data on what we see. A couple of our operating assumptions are these. A prominent feature in this district are those smokestacks. We've all seen them. They're 255 feet tall. So we recognize that at that height, we're in a situation where there's an existing use and an existing height. If we're going above that, we're in new territory in terms of potential impacts in that area. As when we get further into this, you'll see that what we have in written into this is that if we were ever to propose a building over 200 feet, we would go through a design review process, such as the one you all do frequently, particularly in the downtown districts, to make sure there's the right meeting of community benefit and also architecture and other items that will be conducive with the neighborhood. Right now, what we do know is that we're focusing very much on where reserving space and prioritizing space for the major league facility, which would be right there again next to the river. And then we already have an office user who wants to come forward, and we are sharing some of those very preliminary concepts on that office user and what they're looking for in terms of an office building. Right now, that office building would be under the 200 feet, but it's good because it would bring some immediate vitality to this area and make it so that we can get moving forward with this project quickly. As was indicated by the staff, we don't have lot area setback or other restrictions, but of course building requirements will still apply as they would. And there is a good ad making sure that we don't have doors or other impediments into the public ways or sidewalks or roads, which, believe it or not, does happen in some communities, but won't happen here. Building height, I was touching on this just a moment ago. So the intent would be that if we're proposing a building 200 feet, then we go through that process. And this is a process you're each familiar with. But what's called out, and I thought was worth mentioning today, is making sure there's a mid-block walkway so that that pedestrian element is preserved. And then another option would be to have an affordable housing project. There are some affordable housing initiatives that are prioritized in the bill, and we'll be supportive of those, but how much of those will be within the site and how much will be near the site are still yet to be determined. And then, of course, creating open space. And let me just pause to make a comment about open space. It's true we didn't put a regulation in the draft, but we do have in our negotiated purchase agreement a private obligation to achieve within this project area, the red area that I showed you, between 12 and 18% open space. And the reason is because as our land planners have been advising us on how to best locate not only the street network, but also to make sure that you have pedestrian areas that would be able to accommodate what would be coming from a major league facility and then wanting them to get into an entertainment district, we're going to need to have sufficient open space so that those connections can occur. And so we hadn't wanted to hardwire that into an ordinance per se, even though it's a private obligation, just because we needed that flexibility. But you know, as each of you have comments, I'm here to take them down, bring them back to our group, and then you're going to see more people at the table than just me when we're here on the 23rd. So just wanted to touch on that.
While you're on that
Yes.
slide, just a couple of quick
Yeah.
questions. So on our page that has the information similar to that, which is page 32 of our report,
Yes.
we have this, and this is just a ticky question, but it says buildings with less than 50% of the total facade surface clad in glass are exempt from the requirement of the minimum setback being located, the step back being located above the first floor. There's all this technical stuff. Later on, sorry, the minimum glass requirements are 50% and 60%. So where are we looking at this below 50% glass clad? Where's that happening? Like if there's a specific exception to the requirements for the design, for the glass percentages?
It's this one right here.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I making any sense? So if you go from that page, so we're looking at 3A, the last sentence, less than 50% of the total facade. And then if you go down in the tables, so this is on then page 38. when we're looking at the frontage along Redwood Road and North Temple, I guess that's where we're talking about the design standards only apply in those areas. So you could have buildings on the interior that don't have that much glass, correct?
That's correct. There are two sets of design standards. I don't mean to interrupt, but two sets of design standards. Some apply to all, and
Got it.
but they're more modest. This the screening, it's the street trees and soil volumes. The ones that were just cited apply to frontage along Redwood and North Temple. And you are correct. You have a 60% ground floor percentage requirement, and then there's a cross section to existing code, and then there is an upper floor glass percentage. And so that's what's intended is once you get to the upper floors, then it falls to 50%.
So wherever those design standards end up applying, whether they're on all public roads and the river, that's the percentages that are going to apply.
It's
Okay.
Redwood and North Temple. We don't have down the river. You're talking about for
Right.
building
I think
space
that's
there.
just staff's recommend. That's part of staff's recommendation, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then another question on this page, so B3, so 3B3. The proposal includes a privately owned, publicly accessible open space on the property or on another property within the geographic boundaries. And I understand that paragraph at the end says existing public open space areas, FD, are not eligible for purposes of this subsection, but I would say we need a little more clarity there.
Okay.
Just
I think one of the intents, and I'd love your reaction to that, is certainly it makes sense if there's an open area, which there isn't much, because if you think about this area, it's primarily a headquarters for a utility, closed down Ramada Inn, an old closed down trucking terminal, and then lay down yard for a regional utility. But to the extent there is public open space in there, we're not going to be able to double dip and claim that that's part of the dedication would qualify us as, or entitle us to go after over 200 feet. I think the intent is that we're going to have open space that will be shown, made available, and that would need to be identified on an application for a particular building site seeking to go more than 200 feet. I think what I'm hearing is maybe when we're throwing in that concept, it could be other than the property that's being developed. That's where it gets a little confusing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think
Okay.
you just need some clarity on that.
I'll take that. We'll
I
make those
think.
edits.
And on the topic of open space, it's great. I love that it's in your PSA to have these percentages of open space. I think that's great. And then my next question is, if you're willing to do it, let's just get it in the terms with the
Okay.
city.
I'll put that out there. Thank you.
I agree with that too. That it would be nice to have it in the agreement, and then we all know what the definition of open space is in that case. And
Okay.
I agree
Thank you.
too.
Thank you for letting me interrupt.
And I didn't mean to interrupt. Do you have anything to add on that? Okay, thanks. Great, thanks for those comments. Continuing on. And then on uses, the general gist, if you will, it's an extensive extensive list of uses. The intent is to, again, provide a broad canvas. Conditional is really rather narrow. We'd only be dealing with uses we don't anticipate having there, but we're trying to get it right on the first instance. And then there are some uses that are expressly prohibited. We'll take back to our group the list that the staff shared in their presentation to see if we shouldn't come to an agreement on some additional changes. Other comments?
on the uses table, I have a question about, it just says short-term rentals are permitted use. And I wonder if staff maybe can say what the definition of that is. Does that mean Airbnbs or does that mean hotel and motel?
Hotel and motel have a separate definition.
Yeah.
So it would mean Airbnbs. So the way we define it now is less than 30 days. That being said, there have been some policy changes within the city's business licensing. And maybe Nick can make sure I'm saying this 100% correct because it was just brought up to our staff, I think yesterday. I believe that we are no longer permitting short-term rentals anywhere within the city.
So just a correction on that. Any zoning district that allows any sort of lodging use, so less than 30 days, an Airbnb is allowed by
Right.
zoning.
Right.
The business license thing is totally separate. So that's up to business licensing to figure out whether they're going to license them or not. But zoning allows that short-term rental in those same zones where you could have a hotel, a motel, bread and breakfast, et cetera.
So in the definition of short-term rentals, we recently only just added that to the ordinance, right? And so it doesn't, in this case, that zoning, there are other places in the city that currently allow short-term rentals.
Yeah, any zone that allows one of those uses I mentioned, we have allowed short-term rentals in.
And a zoning, there exists in other places in the city, places where you can have dwellings, like homes, and short-term rentals, and hotel, motel, bed and breakfast, all of that
There are some of
exists in
those
other
zones.
places in our city.
Yeah, so most of our higher-end mixed-use zones, commercial zones, et cetera, that allow hotel and motel or bed and breakfast also allow a variety of residential uses. And so in those zones, yes, you could have some residential uses that are converted to Airbnb. In a strict residential zone, any short-term rental is not allowed by zoning.
Okay. If it's in a zone that allows hotel, motel, short-term rentals are also allowed in homes that are built as single-family residences.
In those zones, yes.
Okay. Currently
Yes.
and here. Thank you.
And if I may, just for a moment, our current planning doesn't show any detached single-family dwellings within our private lands at all. We would have multifamily, attached, stacked flats, and there may be room for some townhomes at some point too. There will be, however, hotels. We're anticipating hotels because it's a very complementary use with a stadium of the type we're looking to build.
I also feel supportive of the list that the planning staff suggested that also maybe doesn't fit in this zone. And the rest of you can weigh in if you want to on that too.
No, I agree with that. As I was going through the list, I thought, these seems very excessive.
Okay.
That seems like a very strong word, but it seemed like,
I
I agree with the
it
list.
doesn't feel like a strong one here.
Our chair said
It's
that
a
in a
long
much
list.
better way.
I've done a lot of projects and never one of quite this size,
Yeah,
or with
right.
it as extensive. So, anyway,
This is one small note. On some of the notes
Yeah.
to the table, it referenced specifically the arena. And if you're writing this for zoning, I get that it's anticipated there will be an arena there. Maybe just look at whether that's what you really want to have there, or if it's to reference a building. I think some of it specifically was in terms of the rooftop signage, if I'm remembering correctly.
my thought, and I'd love your reaction to this, is as the staff was making its presentation on the sign component, my thought is we probably need to do a clean through before we bring this back to you. Because what we're doing there is this, we took part of, ironically, a Miller Initiative sign overlay that was done back in 2016 with Nick and others. And we're taking some of those components to put in that area to anticipate a stadium or arena type use. Mm-hmm. But it needs to be cleaned up in terms of making sure that it works for the fact that this district has a lot else going on, just not only a stadium.
Yeah.
So the footnotes and I think maybe some other components might need to be cleaned up before we're back before you. Okay. Great, thank you. And then here, again, is the design standards, which I think we've already covered. We've touched on, I should say. But this talks in terms of building materials, ground floor use. These are the types of things that would need to be shown in an application to have buildings fronting those public roads. And then I understand that staff has asked for any public road, not just simply those two roads. And so that's something we need to consider. And if any of you any one of you has a opinion on that, just let me know or let us, the staff, know, because that's going to be on our list of things to review.
Does ground floor use mean ground floor active use? The way we've been discussing it? Is that what that means? Thank you.
Yeah, I just would definitely lean towards staff's recommendation on that. We in the city put a lot of emphasis in trying to construct that ground floor pedestrian-oriented environment. And I mean, Sasaki is great at doing that, so they're going to do great. But having it in the code as a requirement feels like if it's already going to happen, let's just put it in the agreement.
Just
Let's
confirm
just
it.
like
Okay.
make sure that it happens.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And then this is the section which I think we should spend more time on when we go through the combing exercise, as was just indicated. But the intent there is to make sure, as we look for an opportunity to locate the type of facility we're wanting to place right there between South Temple and North Temple and adjacent to the river, that we're able to create the entertainment feel that you would have. But as what you'll see in our next meeting is that as you're moving towards the west, what you're going to have is a pedestrian area, but then also blocks and areas for multifamily, office. And we are really going to emphasize office. I know that's not necessarily a topic that's, I see as many office applications coming in right now because of the market. But where we already have an office user for at least 10 stories who's wanting to come in and get moving now, we see there an opportunity. That's an opportunity to build some other offices right in that vicinity. And the other thing we of course like is that if we have an office use, that works well with the parking demand for a stadium, particularly for those night games. So anyway, some of the topics that we're looking at, and I know you've been very generous to let me drone on as long as I have in this briefing. I know it was intended to just be an overview, but please provide to me any input, and then as we go back and have our internal meetings and are starting to prepare for the 23rd, we'll attempt to address all of your comments.
I have some general thoughts for you. One of the things that I do agree with is definitely some design standards along the river. The river is a huge asset that the city has been investing in terms of visioning and master plans. And I think that that's an appropriate frontage. So as far as like streets infrastructure that you intend to build in this area, it may be a nice compromise that if you have a major street that's going to be somewhat of an arterial street, that could be one that we include in a design review.
Okay.
And then if you have some side streets that aren't necessarily facilitating the type of traffic movement that say we have in the city, those may be exempt. That's just a thought. But I think the primary reason when I look at design reviews and when we have a project that has multiple street frontages, part of what I know that there's this balance because you got to have like what we call the back of the building, right? You
Yep.
still have to have services. But I think that we are at a time where we can be a lot more innovative, that the back of the building doesn't look like what it did 30, 40, 50 years
Yep.
ago. And so I think if you take that into consideration of how you're designing those buildings,
Yep.
that's a big part of that activation, because if we have a building that has at least 3 major streets, they can't have every bit of it be active. They have to have services and utilities and all that somewhere. So I'd be comfortable with some sort of a hybrid to having every street be applicable to design review. But I think this area is so large to have nothing in the interior kind of be applicable to those design review standards is probably won't yield the best projects that you could. And that might just be something you could consider. But I definitely think the river should be open to some standards, the design standards. Some other comments, I can't use my glasses to see close up, but I need them to see far away. One of the things that I really, when you look at this aerial, and one of the things I hope we don't see in this project, are these vast parking lots.
Yeah.
So I really hope that you're innovative in the parking areas to utilize parking garages in certain ways, so we don't have vast areas of concrete and
That's right.
surface parking lots, because that's a really inefficient use of land.
Let me just stress that. We intend to have really no surface park. We will have surface parking in an interim state while we're waiting for some development to occur, but wherever there will be surface, our intent is to get it into a structured parking eventually.
That's
So
great.
it's a wiser use of land, and we're trying to achieve a lot of activity in this area, and we feel like that gets lost if it's just a sea of parking.
That's exactly the truth. I also think it would be really, really great if you, and I don't know if this is necessarily needs to be part of the agreement or whatnot, but you have 2 track stops servicing this area. One obviously closer to the potential stadium and one further down to another part of the district. I really hope that your infrastructure, as you design it, capitalizes on that pedestrian movement into and out of your district along North Temple.
Depends on it in real terms, because so
I mean,
many of
that
our
is-
users
if-
will be coming from
Yeah,
that way.
if you don't do that, you are completely missing the point and capturing that movement well. If you don't do that,
Correct.
and I think that should be a really big priority of how then when you develop within your property, you develop those walkways or that pedestrian movement and that flow towards your stadium and towards other parts of what you might consider an entertainment district, that you pay special attention to those. And then I'm also not necessarily against a percentage of open space being designated instead of it being connected to X number of parcels, but I think 12% is way too low. You should be like 18 to 20%.
Okay.
Honestly, if you want to like really do it well, and these are things that make your project better, make your projects more amenable to people that live there, the people that want to visit there, to come stay, to come and enjoy, even when there's not a game, to come out and utilize that area. So they're entirely to your benefit to do, and I kind of hope you err on the little higher percentage for that. And those are like my basic question or my basic comments is maybe you move forward in a plan that we can work with the city, but otherwise I think the city recommendations aren't onerous.
Yep.
There's a couple little compromises I think that are okay, but the priorities for the city I think are spot on. How we go about maybe getting those we can tweak into certain hybrids, but I think that we all want this to succeed.
Thank you.
That's the number one thing, because this is a great opportunity for this area. It's a huge area, and I think we all want this to succeed. So thank you for coming tonight as well at the briefing and giving us an idea of what your vision and your priorities are, even if there aren't renderings yet. So
Thanks again.
So one thing that I am really conscious of about is, so I live on the west side. So I would love to be able to engage with this space, be a part of this space, but I also just worry about my neighbors, and a lot of the neighbors rent. So the chance of displacement goes up dramatically whenever we have this beautiful thing that we all want to be a part of and is incredible. And so do you have any, I know that there's a consideration for affordable housing units, which could offset some of that displacement conversation, but can you just talk to me about like what your thoughts are on displacement in this area and how you plan to be able to try to mediate some of that issue?
Yeah, so it's certainly a very dynamic issue, and I don't want by my answer to think that I've addressed all of the issues, because and I'm giving short shrift to the other elements. But two things that jump out at me are these. One is we'll be bringing more supply. We're intending to bring multifamily supply. That will help in addressing the shortage. But then importantly, and I credit the city and the state in working together, the monies that are generated from this, you're having, depending on which lands they're generated from, are between 10 and 20% of the increment will be made available for affordable housing. And so that is going to help with respect to providing supply in the area. Some of it may be within the project, other will be within the vicinity. And remember that this district applies to areas broader than just this red area. But the intent would be to be creating that supply of resource that could then be used for projects that provide 80% AMI, and maybe even create some opportunities for a LIHTC and other types of, which then are obviously more attainable, or more affordable rather.
Does that, so if some of that tax increment ends up creating more supply in the neighborhood, does that then follow Salt Lake City standards for the way that we deal with new development? Because I can't remember what it's called, but it's when you create a structure, you have certain things you have to do for the population that was in that location before. What is that called? It's just the community benefit. Maybe I'm just too used to the term.
You might be referring to our community benefit ordinance that was passed. Any rezone, general plan amendment needs to address displacement.
Yeah. So I guess just like when purchasing property outside of this increment area, with some of that tax incentive, which is going to be amazing. That's great news. Does that then fall under city standards, or is that kind of back to kind of the state gets to use whatever terms they want to be able to develop?
I'll look into that to get you a better answer, but I want to identify one item really quickly. The risk of displacement that we see in other developments isn't here with this one. And the reason is if you look at the purple boundaries, there's not a residence in any of them.
Right.
So we're not looking to remove an existing residence and then replace it with something else. And the other reason I went back to this slide is I think there is a lot of opportunity to put these parking fields and maybe underutilized, or in some cases of one of these buildings and a shuttered state building, and putting it to a use that could be fulfilling that housing need. So I don't want you to think we've thought of all the answers, but we're definitely very aware of not wanting to displace people, and we want to bring more supply. And we are going to have a mix. We're going to have a lot of rental product as part of this. We'll also have to sell in terms of condo in this as well. We don't want it to all just be one class. But we are excited about the affordable housing resources that are going to be made available by this project. And it's one of the reasons we want to get it going, so that revenue streams becomes more robust more quickly.
Cool. Yeah. That is new to me that some of the tax increment is going to affordable housing. So that's really, really great news. Thank you for making that happen.
For sure.
I'm curious to understand why is it really this important to you that the riparian overlay not apply?
We'll bring forward some details. Our thought in drafting the way we drafted it is that we're going to be bringing the stadium right near to the river. And then we're going to have plaza space. And we're going to want to activate and make it so that, I don't want to call it a river walk, but you want to have it so people can interface with the river. In our hope of hopes, I would love to see an experience where you start at the Fisher Mansion, you rent your boat, and you go through this area and you pull out maybe over here at one of these park areas, and you have that section of the river cleaned up, and it's a place where anytime someone's in town, this is an experience you're going to bring everyone to go see. And does that mean that the riparian overlay can't work? We're just trying to give ourselves the ability to put in those kind of activation sources so that we can have the stadium right next to it, we can have some plaza space and the rest. And we'll look to make sure we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but the intent is to truly look for an opportunity to make that be an active component and not just something where development kind of has turned its back on this river historically, and we want to be forward facing towards the river. And I don't think the riparian overlay is intended to prevent that. I think it's intended to protect it. It's just where we're trying to have as much activity in this area. Our concern is we might not be. There are limitations on how close you can have structures.
Right.
And it's in tiers. It's more than one tier. It just depends, 25, 50, 100. Right. And our thought is we didn't want to end up in something that might interfere with that vision. We're also dealing, as I mentioned at the outset, with Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. Now, their ownership ends at the top of Bank, but we want to make sure there's a good seamless interface. The other thing is we're going to be dealing with the city regardless. Why? Because this is an important part for Trails Network. So, and if we're going to succeed, we got to tie into the Trails Network. And so I think the city interest will be represented. I just don't know if that riparian overlay is the best way to make it work. But, we've heard the comments, and so we'll take another look.
Yeah. It seems like there's maybe a finer way to thread that needle rather than nothing or all.
Yeah, I'm writing that down.
So, I mean, we recently unanimously kind of voted against the SEG proposal because we thought that it was too fast, and it wasn't something that you could put a great amount of thought into and that we could like respond to in any real way. And that was for 2 blocks. And I think that, I mean, I get that it's not the same position because of the legislature, and so it's just what it is. But I have all the same concerns about that. I think that I don't have many real specific things like, oh, we should add this to the draft agreement or whatever, just because for all the reasons that you talked about, because everything is ongoing and changing and we don't know, and so we don't have anything to respond to. And so, I mean, I don't know. I would love to see at least like a map, like there's no master plan. It says we don't, it read to me like a list of laws that you didn't have to follow. There weren't any real, there wasn't anything that's like, oh, this is what the goal is or what we're doing. There's, as written, I don't see much substantive difference between letting the clock run out and saying you can build literally whatever you want and signing the term sheet that we're looking at right now. Because I don't think there's very, very little about what's in there. And I think that makes sense for the ballpark, for the area around it. Like, I think spaces like that are so unique that it's whatever, but then there's this enormous swath of land that we're just kind of saying, do whatever. And I think that it seems like it is creating a separation from the city rather than something that's connected to it. Like it talks about in the term sheet about like, after this gets created, it doesn't matter what Salt Lake City like laws or zoning changes happen, they don't matter there. So we can't respond to a kind of change in need or see that like something isn't working there, and so this is how we want to guide it. What it reminds me of is I go to South Lake Tahoe a lot, and there's the border there where half the city is in California and half is in Nevada.
Yeah. And
it goes from 2-story kind of like wood log cabins to 13, 14-story concrete boxes that are casinos and parking. And I worry that this is just carte blanche for Larry H. Miller's own little Vatican City in Salt Lake.
I mean, I think you're raising a good couple of points. Let me address it this way. First on the SEG, I mean, I think what's not the same here is this is an area where people have not historically interacted, right? We all have our experiences, expectations, understanding of how the downtown feels. And so I haven't studied it beyond that, but I think that what we have is a bit more of an area that is new to all of us, because how many of us have ever been to the Rocky Mountain Power Yard? None of us. Oh, wait, you have. Well, fair enough. Sorry. always have some sort of exception, and it's right here. Thank you. But I think it's a bit more of a blank slate. But to get to your point, if you look at this screen, what it shows is majority of the purple is an area where the state is the owner. And what we're trying to do is carve out the area where there's going to be still heavy city interaction. And we think there's value to that. Even if it doesn't read as regulatory as you might see otherwise in another district, we think there's a lot of value to having this area of land prioritized for interaction with the city on an ongoing basis. I mean, we're anticipating significant density, a lot of building types and the rest. We envision that the project will be made better by bringing in applications and working them through with staff who deals with the city. We are envisioning that as we are saying that this is an area that is not exempt from zoning, but rather it has the city zoning apply. It will be able to address those things that, even if they don't make it all into the ordinance, you're going to have something that is going to correlate well with the way the city is trying to program the rest of North Temple or Redwood Road. And I think for that, even though it maybe isn't as extensive as you might otherwise prefer to see, we're trying to find that happy Goldilocks medium, if you will, where you have principles put into code that would apply to this area and would say that this area will continue to be regulated by the city and will be coming forward and bringing the applications and seeking the approvals, versus the other areas where, you know, those are exempt as right now. May not be a completely satisfactory answer, but it's something that we're striving to
Yeah, I think
balance.
to me it reads more as a confirmation of not having to follow the rules rather than actually trying to create rules or guidelines or whatever. So yes, it means that you're going through the city, but it also says in there that like the city has to approve your site plan and has to do it in 10 days, I think. And you further things don't apply. I don't know. It seems very much about that you can do kind of anything. And so I don't see the vision. I worry about that because I mean, there's always a balance between like, we don't know what will get built in something, right? And so we have to weigh both the like legislative, like how we can actually codify something to get what we want, and the vision. People often come in with renderings and with things, and they look great, but if there's nothing there that makes that happen. And here we don't even have that. We don't even have kind of an overall, like there's what could be a layout for a master plan, but it's changing, and I don't know. I like I said, I understand that it's a function of the legislature and how it's set up, and that it's not easily fixed. But that's my worry for that, is that this creates its own little island that separates itself out rather than connecting to. And the other thing, one thing that I do think shouldn't be in the zoning is it's written that any property will get changed if Larry Miller buys it and it's next door. So it seems like a poor decision for me to say that as long as they can purchase the property next door, that then it spreads and it kind of grows and becomes as big as they can purchase. I think that if we're creating this district, we should set the boundaries of it at the very least.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I feel really supportive of there was a slide that had the main city priorities, and I think there were 3 of them, and I feel really supportive of those priorities. We've made decisions in the past about people's private property and how the riparian corridor interacts with that, and it seems like we did it for a reason, and probably I feel like the riparian corridor overlay should count here too. To be clear, properties that are owned by the state are not subject to city zoning
Correct.
rules right now, and they won't be going forward,
Correct.
regardless of what agreement is made here.
Correct.
Okay, and you're saying that's a significant portion of this purple
Purple.
area, which is where this agreement would happen. So I feel a little concerned about the creep of the border creep, if that exists, that buying more property makes it a bigger area. And I'm really supportive of those primary city priorities.
Okay.
Anybody else want to toss in your last few cents?
Yeah, I have a couple of other things. One is, this to build on what Commissioner Scott was saying, this is rezoning, so we don't even need to be looking at or considering plans, because we are essentially creating an island with this other zoning, and these rights will be now attached to that land, regardless of who owns it. Larry Miller Larry Miller companies have a great track record. We love that and hope that continues, but this is going to be then attached to that land. And so I think
Right.
that's part of why everybody wants to be so careful this way. On the term sheet, I just have question on the 2015 easement. The term sheet specifies that the easement will be terminated as part of in the MDA itself, and that there will be an MOU for alternative easement access. You know, from a city perspective, that just seems problematic to me. I don't want to terminate, you know, an easement and then be waiting on an unenforceable MOU. I would say if you can negotiate something there so that you're terminating and granting at the same time, that would be better.
Great, thank you.
So if you could look at that. And then I get the you know, not requiring the dedication of open space as part of an approval, but maybe if you could look at what, you know, whether it's required or whether you voluntarily put it in the MDA, but some kinds of public easements over publicly owned or privately owned open space. I would just hate to see, you know, 20, 30, whatever years down the road, there be all of this privately owned space that, for whatever reason that we don't foresee right now, somebody starts blocking public access to. So
Gotcha.
I get that you don't want maybe a public dedication in full, but some kind of public easement to ensure that the public has access rights, I think would be something to consider.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks all for your time tonight.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to seeing you in
Thank
2
you.
weeks.
Thank you
for
very
your
much
time.
for your presentation.
Thank you, Ms.
Appreciate it.
Rowan. Okay, that is the end of our agenda, so I'm going to close this meeting. Thanks for coming. Adjourn.